Dark Souls Remastered is finally here. This offers the perfect chance to revisit lore for veterans of the Souls series, but more importantly, it offers new players the chance to delve into what could become the definitive edition of one of the best games the last gaming generation had to offer. With that in mind, here are my top 10 tips to tackle Dark Souls Remastered for new players. Number 1. Commit to a build. First things first, creating your character. Like any RPG, having an idea of who or what you want your character to be can have a huge impact on how you play the rest of the game. If you want to focus on sorceries for instance, making sure to pick the sorcerer class and placing an emphasis on increasing your intelligence stat is the way to go. Whereas if you'd wanted to go for a strength build, which I have found I personally had the most success with, the bandit class would be the best starting point as it has the highest starting strength stat. Whilst the options are certainly there for you to modify your character however you want by simply increasing the appropriate stat, if you have no clear idea of what you want to do with your character, or what you are building towards as a gameplay style, then you will end up potentially wasting early, less costly levelling up opportunities on stats you may never use. If you don't intend to make use of miracles for instance, then building up your faith stats early on will likely not be as beneficial as say increasing your vigour or dexterity. In some cases, it can even be beneficial to have multiple saves and to try out different starting classes to get a feel for what playstyle you would like to commit to. Number 2. Pick black firebombs as your gift. One of the last decisions you will make prior to starting the game is what gift to start the game with. Whilst options like the Tiny Beings Ring, which grants you a small boost in HP, or the Master Key, which can grant you access to certain areas of the game long before you would normally reach them, are tempting to give you a perceived early game advantage, the best gift to start with for me is the black firebombs. Just a few of these are enough to off the Asylum Demon the first time you encounter him, which leads to you obtaining the Demon's Great Hammer at the start of the game. A fact which leads to my next point. Number 3. Early game weapon drops. It seems to be that for at the very least the first few hours of the game, if you manage on your first attempt to kill any of the sub-bosses or stronger enemies such as the Black Knights you can encounter in the Undead Burg and the Dark Root Basin, they have a higher probability of dropping powerful weapons for early on in the game. The Black Knight in the Undead Burg, for instance, normally drops the Black Knight Sword, a weapon that does 220 base damage in comparison to the short sword which only does 78. This makes a huge difference when facing some of the earlier enemies and even bosses in the game, even enabling you to one-shot the Taurus Demon with a plunging attack. Number 4. Farming. You will need to put some additional work in to wield most of the weapons I have mentioned however, as their stat requirements are often way above what you already have. Whilst it's true that stronger enemies will provide more souls upon death, it doesn't actually take that many souls to level up early on in the game, so there's a lot to be said for sticking to slaying lower level enemies repeatedly to harvest their souls. By the time you've reached the bonfire in the middle of the Undead Burg, you can potentially have amassed about 1500 souls, which is more than enough to start leveling up in earnest. Whilst the amount of souls required to level up increases each time you do so, if you're prepared to grind the earlier areas of the game, this does not provide much of a problem, and can be a great way to practice basic combat techniques such as parrying whilst working towards your overall goal. Number 5. Learn to be evasive. Your greatest defense in Dark Souls isn't always necessarily your shield, but how good you are at dodging and evading enemy attacks. Your evasive role offers you a brief moment of invincibility that when timed correctly can nullify enemy attacks, as well as reposition you to avoid follow-up strikes. If you can put little time into raising your proficiency in this particular skill, it can save you a lot of grief when it comes to dealing with slower enemies that deal high damage with their attacks, as you can simply outmaneuver them. It also means you'll be able to retreat from situations you are becoming overwhelmed by more efficiently to get your bearings. Number 6. Patience is a virtue. It can be very tempting to charge into a new area all guns blazing, particularly if you've just defeated a boss character and are feeling like an actual god, which makes it all the more humbling when a lowly hollow soldier gets the drop on you and in a blind panic you roll off a nearby cliff. Treat every new area with suspicion and caution, and take time to learn enemy attack patterns whilst maintaining a steady defense. The game will also occasionally reward your patience and persistence. For instance, if you have the patience to stand beneath the bridge guarded by the Hellkite dragon and continuously fire arrows into its tail, this will eventually sever and gift you the Drake Sword, another high damage weapon that can really provide you with an offensive boost going into the Undead Parish. Number 7. Don't bother buying bows or crossbows, but do buy arrows and bolts. Having an option for a ranged attack can give you a big advantage when trying to decide how best to approach any potential obstacles, giving you the opportunity to deal damage before engaging an enemy properly, or even lure enemies away from larger groups to deal with them one at a time. Bearing this in mind, it can be very tempting to purchase a bow or crossbow from the merchant in the Undead Burg when you get the first opportunity, but in actual fact you end up picking up a light crossbow and a longbow relatively early on in the game, either as a random drop from enemies or as a pickup from corpses in both the Undead Burg and Darkroot Basin. As a result, it is better to spend your souls instead on making sure you are fully equipped with arrows and bolts, as whilst these are occasionally dropped by enemies, they are nowhere near as common as you would expect. Having a healthy supply of these keeps your options open and is a relatively inexpensive and safe way of dealing damage. Number 8. Don't be afraid to cheese enemies. Like any game, there are exploits which can be utilised within Dark Souls to help you defeat tougher enemies early on in the game. Heading back to what I previously mentioned about both Black Firebombs and the Black Knight in the Undead Burg, the Knight can easily be slain by exploiting the fact he cannot climb ladders and will continue to try and attack you despite being out of attack range. By climbing to the top of the ladder that has the 3 hollows on throwing firebombs at you, in some cases the Knight can become caught on the layout of the area, allowing you to throw black firebombs at him until he perishes and drops the Black Knight's sword. Yes, it's cheap, but early on in the game it can provide you with a considerable advantage. The other thing to consider is that, as obvious as this sounds, Dark Souls is a video game, and a lot of enemies will have certain parameters they cannot pass, which will see them automatically start to retreat if you can lure them across. You can see this effect with Havel, the hostile NPC who stalks the lower level of the tower you ascend to face the Taurus demon. If you can get him to chase you up to the level you first enter the tower and exit out of the door, he cannot follow you any further than the stairs leading down from it and will immediately start to retreat. This gives you the opportunity to unload throwing knives, fire bombs, bolts, arrows, sorceries, basically whatever you have available as a ranged attack into him, with little to no chance of repercussions. This also causes him to drop Havel's ring, which when worn increases your maximum equip load. Number 9. Don't underestimate the value of endurance. Speaking of which, equip load is something that is really worth paying attention to early on in the game. To improve this, you need to upgrade your endurance, which, along with increasing your equip load, also increases your stamina and bleed resistance. The reason this is important is so that you can avoid the dreaded fat roll. Fat rolling can be lethal, as essentially your evasive roll slows to a crawl and leaves you open to attack, rendering the brief moment of invincibility almost useless. To combat this, you normally have to wear lighter armors which don't offer as much protection. In a way, this offers a good balance between having a lighter, faster character that does not deal as much damage but deals it quicker, compared to a slower character that can take and deal more damage at a reduced rate. However, if your equip load is higher, then you can potentially reap the benefits of being able to move as quickly in full metal armor as you would in leather armor, making your character far more durable without the expense of maneuverability. Number 10. Prepare to die. You will die in Dark Souls. A lot. Possibly the most important thing to do early on is accept this as an inevitability. Dying can be really frustrating at times, particularly if you've amassed a large quantity of souls. But if you can change your mindset to see dying as less of you losing the game and more as just another game mechanic, things get much easier to handle. And that's my top 10 tips to tackle Dark Souls Remastered. Hopefully what I've put on this list will be of help to someone, but if you have any further tips and tricks to add, please put them in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, please drop it a like and subscribe for more video game related content and playthroughs.